The Varkos 7 Galactic Prison was a place where only the most ruthless, violent, and dangerous criminals in the universe were sent. It was a lawless hellhole where the strong ruled and the weak didn't last long. The guards didn't care what happened inside. There were no laws, no rules, only power and survival. Among the murderers, warlords, and assassins of countless species, there was one human prisoner. Nobody feared him. Compared to the other inmates, massive, armored, clawed, or venomous creatures, the human looked like nothing. He had no fangs, no natural weapons, no tough skin. The other prisoners laughed at the very thought of him surviving in their world. To them, he was prey. So, when one of the strongest alien gangs in the prison decided to make an example out of the human, nobody was surprised. It was tradition. New inmates had to learn their place. And what better way to do it than to publicly humiliate and beat one of the weakest species in the galaxy? The gang surrounded him in the prison yard, their leader grinning with anticipation. The first punch landed squarely in the human's gut, a hit that could have shattered bones, collapsed lungs, killed lesser beings. But the human didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. The laughter stopped. The gang leader hesitated, confusion flickering in his reptilian eyes. He had fought hundreds of beings in this prison. He had seen creatures beg for mercy after a single strike. But this human? He was still standing, still breathing, his gaze sharp and focused. And then the human smiled. What happened next no one could have predicted, because these aliens had never fought a Deathworlder before. The fight lasted seconds, but the lesson would last forever. The galaxy's most feared criminals were about to learn a brutal truth. You never start a fight with a human. You won't survive it. The Varkos 7 Galactic Prison was the final destination for the worst criminals in the universe. Located in the depths of a dying star system, it was a fortress built to contain the most dangerous beings known to exist. The prisoners here were warlords, assassins, and ex-soldiers of failed empires. Some had committed genocides, others had slaughtered entire colonies. The guards did not intervene in the prison's internal conflicts. Varkos 7 operated on one law: survival of the strongest. Into this living hell, a single human was thrown. His name was James Carter, and his presence confused everyone. Humans were not known for their strength. The dominant species in the prison, beings covered in natural armor, enhanced muscles, venomous fangs, or razor-sharp claws, looked at James with amusement. They had never encountered a human before, but from what they had heard, humans were weak, fragile creatures. James had been thrown into Varkos 7 under false charges. He had once been a soldier, a warrior who had fought to defend a human colony from an alien invasion. But the Galactic Council, desperate to keep the peace between greater empires, had sacrificed him to avoid war. They labeled him a war criminal and sentenced him to life in Varkos 7. He didn't care. All James knew was that he had been sent to a place where strength was the only currency, and nobody feared humans here. The prison had an unspoken hierarchy. The most powerful species ruled over the weak. Gangs formed quickly, and the strongest took control of the food, medical supplies, and the rare chances for freedom. The ruling gang, the Red Fangs, was led by a brutal, reptilian warlord named Gorvath, a being twice the size of James, with claws capable of tearing steel. The moment James arrived, he became a target. The Red Fangs didn't just rule through strength, they ruled through fear. Every new inmate had to bow or be broken, and they saw James as a perfect example to establish their dominance. They would make him suffer. They would make an example of him. What they didn't know was that James was from a death world, a place where everything was a predator, where survival meant adapting, enduring, and overpowering. And unlike them, humans did not fear pain. They evolved through it. When the Red Fangs decided to attack James, the prison population gathered, expecting an easy show. What they got instead was something that would haunt them forever. The prison yard of Varkos 7 was a battleground where dominance was established. It was here that the Red Fangs, the most feared gang in the prison, decided to make an example out of James Carter, the lone human. Gorvath, the gang leader, stood at the center, his massive frame towering over the rest of the inmates. His scales were as tough as Starship plating, his claws sharper than any blade. Around him, his gang members, a mix of brutal species from across the galaxy, formed a circle. The moment James stepped into the yard, the crowd grew silent. A fight was about to happen. James had kept to himself since arriving, watching, learning. He knew how the prison worked, how strength was used to control everything. But unlike the others, he didn't rush to join a gang, didn't look for protection. He just existed, walking the halls with a quiet confidence that confused the others. To Gorvath, this was a sign of weakness. The massive alien grinned, stepping forward. "Human," he said, his deep voice echoing across the yard. "You are nothing here. You are prey. And in this place, the weak serve the strong." James didn't react. He simply stood there, unfazed, watching. The crowd laughed. The Zelthorians, a race of massive insectoid warriors, clicked their mandibles in amusement. The Brackenaar, muscular beasts with skin like rock, growled in anticipation. They had seen this before, new prisoners being beaten into submission, forced to swear loyalty or be left for dead. One of Gorvatha's enforcers, a brutish, four-armed creature, threw the first punch. It was a strike meant to shatter bone, a blow that would have sent any other species crashing to the ground in agony. But when the fist connected with James's stomach, nothing happened. James didn't flinch, didn't step back. His cold, steel-blue eyes locked onto the alien's face, unreadable. The enforcer looked down at his own fist, confused. Then James smiled. Before anyone could react, James moved. Faster than any prisoner had thought possible. He grabbed the alien's arm and snapped it like a twig. The sickening crack of breaking bone echoed across the yard, silencing the crowd. The enforcer screamed, collapsing to the ground, his extra arms clawing at the dirt in agony. The amusement was gone. The laughter stopped. For the first time, fear crept into the eyes of the Red Fangs. Gorvath took a step back, realization dawning in his reptilian gaze. This wasn't a normal fight. They had made a mistake, and James Carter was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The crack of breaking bone still echoed in the air. The massive prison yard of Varco 7, once filled with laughter and mockery, was now silent. Every inmate, every gang leader, every watching guard had frozen in shock. James Carter hadn't just withstood the first hit. He had broken the alien who had attacked him. And he had done it effortlessly. The Red Fangs, the most feared gang in the prison, stood in stunned disbelief. Their fallen enforcer writhed on the ground, his shattered arm hanging uselessly. The rest of the gang, still towering over James, suddenly hesitated. They had expected an easy kill. Instead, they had provoked something they didn't understand. Gorvath, their leader, snarled, his reptilian instincts warring between rage and growing fear. He had to act quickly. If he backed down now, the entire prison would see his weakness. "Kill him," he growled. The remaining gang members rushed forward at once. James moved first. The first alien lunged, his claws aiming for James's throat. But James sidestepped at the last moment, grabbing the alien's wrist and twisting. There was a snap, followed by a strangled scream. The alien collapsed, his arm bent the wrong way, his body convulsing in shock. The second attacker, a brutish six-eyed creature, swung a massive fist at James's head. James ducked low, the punch sailing just inches above him, and delivered a brutal palm strike to the alien's throat. The alien staggered back, choking, its massive bulk crashing to the ground. The third one was smarter. Instead of charging blindly, he drew a concealed plasma blade, its edge glowing blue. He slashed at James, expecting the human to dodge backward. Instead, James did something no one had ever done before. He stepped forward. The alien's eyes widened in shock as James closed the distance instantly, trapping his sword arm and delivering a devastating elbow strike to the side of his head. The impact sent the alien crashing to the dirt, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The watching prisoners had seen thousands of fights, but this wasn't a fight. This was a predator taking apart its prey with terrifying efficiency. James wasn't just strong. He wasn't just fast. He was playing with them. By now, only one remained, Gorvath. The reptilian warlord felt something he had never experienced before in his life. A feeling that his species had not known in centuries. Fear. James Carter turned his gaze to him, the cold, human stare unblinking, calculating. Blood dripped from his knuckles, but his breathing was steady, his body relaxed. Gorvath was twice his size, covered in natural armor, a seasoned killer who had slaughtered entire planets. But now, standing before this human, he felt like prey. The crowd of inmates held their breath. The Red Fangs had ruled the prison for years, using terror and brute strength. But they had never faced a Deathworlder before. They had never faced a human who had decided to fight back. And now, they were about to learn exactly why that was a mistake. The prison yard was frozen in silence. No one had ever seen anything like this before. James Carter stood at the center, surrounded by the bodies of the Red Fangs, some unconscious, others writhing in pain. Their so-called enforcers, the same ones who had laughed and mocked him earlier, were now broken, clutching shattered limbs and gasping for breath. And he had done it alone, without weapons, without armor, without mercy. The remaining prisoners, inmates who had spent their entire lives under the brutal rule of the Red Fangs, watched in stunned silence. Even the toughest killers in Varkos, 7 had never seen someone move like this, had never seen an enemy tear through a gang like they were nothing. James wasn't just winning a fight, he was rewriting the power structure of the entire prison. Gorvath, the Red Fangs leader, stood paralyzed, his reptilian eyes darting between James and his fallen subordinates. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to reassert dominance, but something deep inside, something ancient, was telling him to run. James took a slow step toward him. Gorvath flinched. The shift was instant, undeniable. For years, the Red Fangs had controlled Varkos, 7 through brute strength and intimidation. But now their leader, the one who had ruled through terror, was showing fear. The other prisoners saw it. And in a place like this, that was all that mattered. James stopped in front of him, tilting his head slightly. There was no anger in his expression, no rage. Just cold, calculating control. "I could kill you," James said, his voice calm, steady. "But I want you to live." The entire yard tensed. Gorvatha's clawed hands trembled at his sides. He had been in thousands of battles, had fought monsters and warlords, but nothing had ever made him feel this powerless. James leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice. "I want you to remember this moment," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "Remember how you felt when you realized you weren't the predator anymore." Gorvath looked around, realizing the eyes of the entire prison were locked on him. They had all seen it. They had seen him lose, seen him hesitate, seen him stand frozen while a single human dismantled everything he had built. For the first time in his life, he was the one being humiliated. James stepped back and turned away, dismissing him like he was nothing. Gorvath didn't move. The laughter started slowly. First, from the insectoid prisoners, their mandibles clicking in amusement. Then from the Bracken AR, massive, rock-skinned creatures who had once feared the Red Fangs. The sound spread like wildfire, growing louder, echoing across the prison yard. They weren't laughing at James. They were laughing at Gorvath, at the once feared gang leader who had just been reduced to nothing in front of an entire prison. Gorvath staggered backward, his mind spinning. The Red Fangs were finished. Even if James never touched them again, the damage was already done, because fear was everything in a place like this. And now, James Carter was the one they feared. Word spread fast. Within hours, every inmate in Varkos, 7 knew what had happened. They knew about the human. The Red Fangs had been the unquestioned rulers of the prison for years, but now, they were nothing. Gorvath himself had been broken in front of the entire population, and not a single one of his remaining gang members tried to retaliate. James didn't take over their operation. He didn't need to. He never recruited a gang. He never asked for anything. But suddenly, no one touched his food. No one stole from his cell. No one even made eye contact unless he allowed it. Even the guards, the ones who had been betting on how long he would survive, now watched him differently. James Carter had done something no one had ever done before. He had changed the natural order of Varkos 7. And now, the deadliest criminals in the galaxy had to live with the fact that the most dangerous being in the entire prison was a human. Warden Kreven Talvar had been running Varkos 7 for over 2 decades. In that time, he had seen warlords, assassins, and war criminals pass through the prison's gates. He had seen species capable of tearing through steel, creatures that breathed poison, and telepots who could kill with a thought. But in all his years of running the most dangerous prison in the galaxy, he had never seen a single inmate change the prison's power structure overnight. Until now. Until James Carter. The human had done something unprecedented. He had dismantled the most feared gang in Varkos 7 without forming his own, without weapons, and without needing anyone's help. And that was a problem. Kreven had allowed the prison to run itself for years, letting the strongest inmates maintain order through violence and intimidation. The gangs, while brutal, kept the chaos in check. It was the perfect system. But now, James had torn it apart without even trying. The warden watched the security feeds, his mandibles twitching in frustration. The footage of James standing over Gorvatha's broken body, the other prisoners laughing at the fallen warlord, was spreading across the entire prison network. It had reached even the outer facilities. That kind of power was dangerous. If James had wanted to, he could have taken control of the prison effortlessly. But he didn't. He ignored the gangs, refused to take sides, and didn't demand anything from anyone. He just existed, unshaken, unchallenged, untouchable. And that terrified the warden more than anything. Because if a man like that decided to act, who could stop him? A dangerous offer. Kreven had James brought to his office. The human entered calmly, his hands relaxed at his sides. He showed no fear, no tension, and that only made Kreven more uneasy. "You've disrupted the balance," the warden said, his voice steady, though inside, his mind was racing. "That makes you a problem." James simply stared at him. Kreven leaned forward. "I don't like problems in my prison, so I'm going to offer you a deal. Work for me. Keep the order here. Make sure the other inmates stay in line." James didn't blink. "And if I refuse?" Kreven's mandibles twitched. "Then you won't leave this place alive." Silence filled the room. Then James smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "If I wanted to leave, Warden," he said, voice calm, controlled. "Do you really think you can stop me?" The words hung in the air like a threat, and for the first time in years, Kreven felt a flicker of something he had never experienced toward a prisoner. Doubt. Because the truth was, he didn't know. James had shattered the normal rules of Varkos 7. He had broken the most powerful gang in the prison, rewritten the way things worked without effort. Kreven had seen men like Gorvath, killers who had crushed entire civilizations, reduced to cowards in front of this human. And if James ever decided that he didn't want to stay in Varkos 7 anymore, would they really be able to stop him? The warden's decision. Kreven exhaled slowly, leaning back. "You're different from the others," he admitted. "Most prisoners crave power. You don't." James didn't respond. The warden knew what had to be done. He couldn't control James, couldn't break him. The best he could do was leave him alone. If he pushed too hard, he risked turning the entire prison against him, and Kreven wasn't about to lose control of his own facility. "Fine," Kreven muttered. "Stay out of my way, Carter. Do that, and you might just survive this place." James gave a small, knowing smirk before turning to leave. As the doors closed behind him, Kreven let out a slow breath. James hadn't agreed to anything. He had just walked away like he owned the place. And maybe he did. Varkos 7 had changed. Since the fall of the Red Fangs, the prison had become eerily different. Fights still broke out, but they never involved one person, James Carter. Nobody challenged him. Nobody stole from him. Even the most violent species in the prison avoided his gaze. It wasn't just fear, it was something worse. It was uncertainty. The other prisoners couldn't understand him. He wasn't the strongest, the biggest, or the fastest. He had no weapons, no gang, no allies. And yet, in a prison where only the powerful survived. He had become the one person nobody wanted to cross. But not everyone was afraid. Not yet. There was still one prisoner who refused to acknowledge James's dominance. His name was Gornak the Unbroken, a mountain of muscle and rage, belonging to a species designed for war. His kind had survived planetary extinction-level events, thrived in radioactive wastelands, and could withstand plasma fire at close range. Gornak had never been beaten. Not by the Red Fangs. Not by the guards. Not by anyone. And now he wanted James. The challenge was issued in front of the entire prison. Gornak stood in the middle of the arena, a pit designed for prison disputes. Blood stained the metal floor from countless battles before this one. The rules were simple. One walked out, one did not. James, as usual, didn't react at first. He had no interest in proving himself. He didn't need to. But this was different. Gornak's challenge wasn't just about James. It was about ending the fear that had taken over the prison. If Gornak won, it meant that James wasn't invincible. It meant he was just another fighter. And so, James stepped forward. He didn't hesitate. The fight was on. The moment the signal was given, Gornak charged. The arena shook with the impact of his footsteps. He moved faster than anyone his size had the right to, his massive fists swinging like wrecking balls. One hit could turn bone to dust. James dodged the first blow by a hair's width. The second came even faster. James barely leaned back in time, the air vibrating from the force of the strike. For the first time, he was being tested. Gornak was different. He wasn't like the Red Fangs. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't playing. He was a warrior, a survivor, and he was trying to kill James. A lesser fighter would have fallen already. But James grinned. He saw the pattern. The raw power, the brute strength, it was impressive. But it had weaknesses. Gornak fought like a beast, using overwhelming strength to crush his enemies. But he had never faced a Deathworlder before. James baited him, stepping just close enough to tempt another swing. The moment Gornak moved, James exploited the opening, ducking low and striking at the alien's exposed knee joint. The crack was sickening. Gornak staggered, his face twisted in pain. He had never been hurt like this before. The crowd fell silent. For the first time in his life, Gornak the Unbroken had been broken. The fight could have ended there. But James wasn't done yet. He stepped in close before Gornak could recover. His movements were calm, calculated, merciless. A strike to the throat sent the alien gasping for breath. A second hit to the side of the head made him stumble, his balance lost. The final blow, a brutal elbow to the base of the skull, dropped the warrior to his knees. James grabbed him by the collar, forcing him to look up. Gornak's defiant eyes had changed. Now, they were filled with something new. Understanding. James didn't need to say anything. He just let go and stepped back. Gornak, the undefeated warrior, bowed his head. He didn't submit in shame. He submitted in respect. The entire prison watched as James Carter turned and walked away. There was no cheering, no mocking laughter. Just a deep, suffocating silence. Because now there was no doubt. James wasn't just feared anymore. He was legend. Varkos, 7 would never be the same again. The prison had always been a place ruled by violence, power, and fear, but never had a single inmate rewritten its hierarchy so completely. James Carter had come in as an outsider, a human, a species dismissed as weak. But by the time he walked out of that arena, no one dared challenge him again. Even the guards, who once placed bets on how long he would survive, now kept their distance. The gangs, once warring for dominance, had all come to the same silent understanding. James wasn't to be touched. The fight with Gornak, the Unbroken, had been the final test. It had proven what the entire prison had been slowly realizing. James wasn't just another fighter. He wasn't just strong. He was something else entirely. He had no gang, no weapons, no allies. Yet he had dismantled the Red Fangs, crushed the undefeated warrior, and taken control of the prison without ever once claiming to rule it. That was what truly terrified the others. He hadn't fought for power. He hadn't fought for revenge. He had fought because he could. The galaxy would soon hear whispers of the human in Varkos 7. Stories would spread across space. Some would call him a myth, a ghost, an impossible anomaly. But those who had seen him firsthand? They knew the truth. James Carter hadn't come to rule, but he had become something far greater. A warning. If you ever meet a human, don't make the same mistake we did.